Welcome to Transform Now, the podcast brought to you by robotic process automation pioneer Blue Prism. Digital transformation has the potential to reshape the way companies service their customers, engage their employees, and manage their operations. Whether you're looking to develop strategies, tactics, and best practices to positively impact the future of work, or you're curious to learn how other companies have successfully navigated their digital transformation programs, then this podcast is for you. We're here to help you transform now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Marchuk. Welcome to the Transform Now podcast. We have a very special guest with us today, Tony Wheeler, a professor and dean of the School of Business Administration at Widener University. We'll be talking with him about the impact of technologies like automation, artificial intelligence, and machine learning on business. Welcome, Tony.
Hi, Michael. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great. I'm glad you're here. So I read your article in CEO Magazine where you describe several perspectives that businesses need to evaluate as they're looking to integrate these automation and AI technologies into their corporate fabric. We'll be exploring some of those today, but can first you give us a short introduction and tell us a little more about yourself?
Absolutely. So I'm currently the dean of the School of Business Administration at Widener, as you mentioned, which is a university just outside of Philadelphia. I've spent about 20 years inside of higher education, primarily in the fields of human resource management and organizational behavior. I've been really lucky to also do quite a bit of consulting before entering higher education, but also during my time in higher education. So the idea of understanding how new technologies are affecting businesses, especially from a human resource management side, I guess has always really been part of what I've done when I think back over my career at this point. But so I'm in academia right now. It's been a challenging time, but it's been a lot of fun. And the opportunity to recently write a book was also a really fun, fascinating experience.
That's excellent. We're going to cover some of the information provided in your article, which I imagine came from excerpts from your book. But I'd like you to start by talking about the fourth industrial revolution. Can you describe what that means to you so that the audience is on the same page? Because there have been various descriptions on what the fourth industrial revolution looks like.
You're right, there have been. And in the framework, or I guess the operating idea for me around the fourth industrial revolution, are those technologies that are reshaping a lot of what we used to think was happening in the knowledge economy, but are now being moved more broadly across businesses. So we're talking about the technologies of automation, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. So those are really the core technologies when we're talking about the fourth industrial revolution.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, in your article, you mentioned that the evaluations of these technologies can be influenced by geographic locations. And can you explain a little bit more why that might make a difference?
The fourth industrial revolution, and we already are seeing it in the early stages of those technologies in terms of their development. Those technologies are not being adopted uniformly across businesses, across industries, but really across geography. And what you're seeing are more advanced technological societies like the United States, like China, like Singapore, like Taiwan, like parts of Europe, where you're seeing a more robust adoption and really development of those technologies. And it's interesting because when you look at investment into those technologies, the United States and China are the two kind of largest investors into the development of those fourth industrial revolution technologies. Whereas in areas like Europe, the Eurozone, they are grappling more with the ethical implications around those technologies. Whereas in China and in the US in particular, we're dealing with the ethical implications as we go. But then you step outside of what we would call developed economies or developed societies from a technological standpoint. And what you're seeing is the technological adoption is years and years behind. So if you're going to go into parts of Central or South America, if you're going to go into parts of Eastern Europe, if you're going to go into Africa, the technology in general lags. And so, of course, the adoption of any of these automation or machine learning or AI technologies are severely lagging behind. And they're actually really unforeseen consequences. We live in a current era where we talk quite a bit about wealth inequality or technology inequality. And likely what's going to happen, we don't know this for sure, but likely what will happen is that as these technologies get more robust in these advanced societies, that technological gap between societies is going to grow. And likely the income or wealth gaps between societies will grow as a function of that. So it's interesting from a business standpoint that you're talking about a future where if you're in a multinational corporation, where some parts of your business will be in countries where the technology is not being adopted, but you're also operating in maybe a different country where you're at the cutting edge of technology. So it's going to be an interesting future.
I imagine it would make it pretty difficult in an organization that has multiple regions to be able to adapt to those type of technologies, especially if one region is so much further ahead than another region. How do you distribute the work?
And it's something that we do discuss in the book. It's almost this idea of thinking fast and thinking slow at the same time. If you're operating in that environment where you are interacting with different countries in terms of their technology, on one hand, things will be happening really quickly in one space, but then there's going to be all these legacy systems in another space. And so that expertise of being able to go back and forth between this kind of very fast, high tech kind of environment to more legacy tech environment, absolutely going to be a challenge, especially, around a human resource perspective.
Yeah, I can imagine. So switching gears from geography, let's talk about industry. How does the evaluation of these technologies for AI and automation and machine learning vary among industries as from what you see?
It's such a fascinating question, Michael, really, because I think a lot of the technology, it's already there and we may not realize it's there. I think the pandemic has shown a light a little bit on some of the technological advances. We all have, people use FaceTime, they use Google Hangout, but how many people knew about Zoom until 18 months ago? And a lot of the technology that underlies Zoom, you could have closed captioning turn on. So you're, a bot and an AI machine is translating your words in real time. So people are becoming more aware of the technology that's really already been there. Within different industries, there's also going to be a gap or a difference in the adoption of some of the technologies, but probably in fascinating ways. So for example, a lot of organizations have been using, a lot of companies have been using AI chatbots on websites for years. And you may not realize when that little chatbot pops up in the corner of your web browser, some people might actually think there's really what we used to think of as a call center person. Now that person, it's a person doing that on your website. No, that's an AI bot doing that. In a lot of highly routine customer facing roles, a lot of companies are already starting to adopt the AI technology. But for companies or for industries that still have a very heavy people focus, where the work routines are not normal, they're highly variable. Even in industries where there's a lot of non-standard physical work movement, the technology adoption is going to be much, much lower there. So what you're looking at is within industries, jobs or functions that are highly routine, that do not require a lot of different physical movements. Those are the ones that the automation and the AI is going to take over more quickly. But I will tell you, even in the retail sector, right now, you could go to a restaurant in China, a cafeteria style restaurant in China, or a pharmacy in China, or a convenience store in China, and in other parts of Asia. But China, again, because of their investment in the technology, more examples of this, where you can go into these places and there are no humans working at all. The food is being made by a robot, the orders are being taken by a machine, the delivery by a machine. All of these things are being done by machine. Simultaneously, if you go to a high-end retail shop right now to say buy your partner or your spouse or your fiance a high-end bag, a highly interactive experience with a person-to-person interface. And so those types of retail jobs are not ripe for displacement. So it's fascinating within industry. And the other example I tend to use is around accounting. There are estimates that say within the next 20 to 30 years that in the United States, at least, all the audit work could be accomplished by as few as 100 auditing firms. Because instead of thousands and thousands of auditors, You need a few auditors who are going to be making high level decisions supported by 2 data scientists who are going to be creating algorithms. So it's going to be an interesting experience. And you already see the variance in the technology now. And by industry, I think what you look to are the jobs that are highly routine. Those are going to be displaced. It's the jobs that take quite a bit of high level decision making, non-routine work, highly variable work, that you're not going to see a ton of it. The financial industry right now is being pretty well technologically adoptive of these. People don't realize that. The accounting industry for sure. And then of course, you're going to get your high tech firms who are building some of the technology. They're also adopting it.
So I want to ask a question sort of, as you mentioned, the robots building or creating, sandwiches for somebody in a shop in China and whatnot. As we're looking at the great resignation, as they're calling it here across the United States, especially, we're seeing this gap of workers, specifically in a particular industry or set of industries, hospitality, restaurant workers and whatnot. The jobs are there. So there's no displacement of jobs. However, what we're seeing is that with these openings, these firms, the restaurants, the hospitality groups, they're experiencing some setbacks because of this. How do you see this technology kind of filling those gaps?
It's happening. And so I'll use an example. I'm here in southeastern Pennsylvania where Wawa is a big convenience store and gas shop in this part of the country. During the pandemic, because of a shortage of workers, was offering $500 signing bonuses for retail work and still couldn't attract enough employees. And the same thing is playing out at McDonald's and Taco Bell, Royal Farms, you name it. It's happening all over the country, that even the signing bonuses aren't attracting people. There's always been this inflection point around cost. And what happens in companies when they're making these decisions, and that they're literally looking at what will cost more, us investing into technology, into AI and robotics, or to continue to hire people. And it's a simple break even. When it gets to the point of adopting the technology, they're going to adopt technology. So for example, McDonald's has been recently, they've made several announcements around this, heavy investment into robotics to automate the production of food. And a lot of it was spurred, not because McDonald's saw it as an opportunity to get more efficient or to cut costs, to cut labor costs. That wasn't what was going on. What was driving it was they couldn't find the human labor to do it. The work can be highly repetitive, and the cost of robotics has really become more affordable now than it had in the past. So to McDonald's, it became a confluence of factors: cost of labor, cost of technology, cost of implementation of technology, and to make sure that the quality of the food. So a lot of large fast food restaurants have gone all in now. And it was because of the lack of labor. There's the labor shortage that had them come to this kind of tipping point on the financial side.
That makes a lot of sense. As you discuss these decisions to use human labor or automation, you've mentioned specific industries where this is happening right now. However, many of these decisions may not be just financial and are certainly not easy to make. How does an organization's appetite for risk affect the adoption of automation and AI? Is it affected by corporate culture?
It's going to be company by company. And there absolutely is a cultural part of this as well, company cultural part of it as well. That some companies, and it's going to be whoever's running the companies and their board, the CEO, the executive suite, whoever those decision makers are, they themselves might think that it's better for their business to either continue to hire employees or to go into a more technologically driven direction around kind of the production of work. So it really does come down to, and I advocate for this quite a bit, it has to be strategically driven. So if a company thinks that their mission is better advanced and they can serve their stakeholders in a better way by adopting technology or by maintaining that strong human workforce, then that's what they're going to do. I do think there will be, and not too far off here, we're talking maybe 10 years, I do think what you'll see more of is most companies, probably mid-sized to larger companies, 500 employees and higher, probably kinds of companies, maybe even down to 200 employees, you will see a mix of that kind of tech work, that automated work and a human workforce. And those decisions will ultimately come down to cost.
Okay, so as companies are factoring these things into their own playbooks, if you will, where do the customers come into play in the decision whether to adopt AI, automation, machine learning?
I don't know if you had an opportunity to watch it in the Olympics this past summer, but it made a big splash. There was a scene of a robot. So the Olympics were held, the Summer Olympics were held in Tokyo. There was a scene of a robot on the basketball court shooting half court shots, full size, like a massive robot shooting full size, shooting half court shots and making them fully, artificial intelligence machine, what we call singular intelligence, where the robotic piece and the AI piece are put together into one. And here's a robot shooting perfect shots over and over from half court. In the Japanese culture, which is known to be very tech savvy, South Korea, known to be very tech savvy, the use of robotics is more normal. In the United States, we might see that and say, this is all the Terminator, that the machines are going to come after us next. And there is this societal culture issue that I think in countries like the United States, we will be a little further behind on deploying robots in more retail settings because our appetite, our comfort with interacting with robots is not as high as perhaps other parts of the world. Companies are going to have to consider that threshold around which kinds of technologies their customers or consumers are comfortable with. I mentioned earlier that a lot of people may not know that the chat bot is the AI bot that's operating in that little chat box in your website. A lot of people may not also know that increasingly a lot of the call center work that we interact with when we call up a company for customer service, we may not realize that we are actually right now talking to a bot. It is not far off. And if you watch movies, if you watched any of the last Star Wars movies, for example, they brought back characters from actors who had died 2 decades ago. And the CGI effects and the ability to use voice technology to completely mimic and replicate someone who's been dead for more than 20 years, that technology exists. We are not far off from a day where we might be on a Zoom and you might think you're talking to me, Tony, as a person, but me, Tony, could actually be a hologram bot. The technology is not far off. But you're right, it has to be about the comfort level of the customers. If the customers don't know that it's a technology apparatus behind a voice or behind a visual component, then that's probably what companies will start with. How good is the technology so that my customers don't know that they're interacting with a bot? Other parts of the world, you're going to see this more and more where the interaction with the robot is the norm. And maybe some societies like ours will say, wait a minute, we're not comfortable with that. We don't want that in the US. But the time has come.
Do you think there's a possibility that the generation transition from the very heavy, what we could turn, I'm falling into that boomer generation X timeframe. We're looking more at the millennial Gen Zs who are much more comfortable with technology as we look at maybe legacy or traditional organizations like banks and insurance companies who we growing up would go to a bank branch office and we would have interactions with a teller, a human teller to do things. Now, we are seeing that certainly the Gen Zs are much more comfortable if they get a check and they understand what a check is. They just take a picture of it to deposit and they move on. They don't go to a bank anymore. They don't want to do it because they prefer dealing with technology for those types of transactions. So I think it's a possibility that this transition won't necessarily have to be behind the scenes, but it could be something that's introduced where the target market may actually choose to do that rather than go to a human.
Absolutely. And even look at self-driving technology. My car doesn't have the automatic parallel parking technology. But look, a lot of people, even, I'm a Gen X person myself. I know a lot of people my age who would be like, cool, I'm going to set the autopilot to park my car for me. That's AI tech right there. So I think you're right. There's an interesting sort of gradual adoption that'll happen, and it's going to happen around, again, routine things that you do over and over that really don't take you a lot of steps to do. Well, those are the things that'll get first automated. So as you're talking about banking, I remember a time where ATMs were highly abnormal. And now I'm lucky if I ever go to an ATM at all, if I'm doing any kind of banking, because I'm already using an app for it. The other thing too to think about, because these timeframes now in our lives, these seem like long timeframes, but in the course of human history, we're talking blips. Imagine the children born during the pandemic or immediately afterwards, and how much now most societies have adapted to new technologies just in an 18-month quarantine environment. Imagine what children born 18 years later from now, their comfort with technology is going to be light years ahead of ours. And you and I will still likely be alive at that point. And will we be as comfortable adopting that technology? Absolutely not. But Generation X, for someone like me, my generation is really small compared to the boomer or millennial generation. So the businesses who are adopting these things absolutely are very consciously hitting markets with these technologies. And someone of my age may not be comfortable with some of it, but I might be more comfortable than maybe my parents' generation, but my kids definitely more comfortable than I am. So I think there is that natural evolution as the ease of the technology increases, the ease of use and the functionality and just the return on the investment, even as a consumer. Yes, I think almost all of us will be incentivized in one way or another to adopt some of these things.
So we talked about customers. The last kind of group that I want to focus in on about with this technology piece is the employees. So as we look at businesses who are saying, gosh, I need to put this in place. I need to make this work to stay in business. And my customers are okay with this. They're adopting it. What about the employees? What's going to take to help the employees feel comfortable adopting these technologies and interacting with them?
I think I've spent quite a bit of time thinking about that very issue. And I tend to be honestly a little more pessimistic about the future of humans in work, at least in economically and technologically advanced societies. Because again, I don't think this is going to happen uniformly across the globe. I do think that on the whole, technology will displace more human jobs than it will create. I do think that this industrial revolution is different from the previous three. I think what will happen is jobs that can be automated will, and what you will end up with is a group of employees who can do functional work. So again, my background is human resource management. I still understand the functional pieces of HR, but I've almost become as much of a technologist as I am an HR expert. And again, the AI and machine learning boom is going to make this easier because, right now, a lot of the recruiting work gets done with an algorithm crawling through LinkedIn and Facebook and Google and all these other platforms. But even the training capabilities, the AI and machine learning pieces of training development are taking over so that the machines are developing better training environments for humans. So the machines will help us get better at the physical work. So I do think it's going to be a challenge. I do think that education is going to play a role in this because I think the earlier that people become more comfortable with the technology, the easier they are at adapting to more technology later. So I think the role of education, K through 12 and higher ed, is going to become increasingly important, even as just citizens using these technologies as customers. I think there's a role for that. I do think there are going to be a lot of disruption to the labor force over the next 20 to 30 years. I think we're going to see a series of disruptions as industries get displaced. But I do ultimately, and I don't want to end it on such a grim note, I do think one of the interesting paradoxes of the advancement of these smart technologies is that the more we use technology, the greater need we have as humans to be connected to each other. And I think the pandemic highlighted this. The thing we've missed the most is being around each other. And so as we adopt more technology, I think it actually gives us a chance to be more human. And I do think that in the book that I wrote, at least, we talked about 100 years from now. I do think 100 years from now, imagine a world where the economy continues to grow because we've gotten more efficient through the use of technology. And yes, jobs have been displaced, but we have societies that are using things like universal basic income to make sure that their populations are still able to live meaningful lives. If I didn't have to worry about work all day to pay bills, what kind of creative work could I do? I do think there's an opportunity down the road for many societies where there could be a second renaissance because we're freed up from having to think about the daily grind and whatever it is you're passionate about. If it's music, if it's writing, if it's painting, whatever that might be, if it's theater, whatever those kind of creative outlets that we have when we have time, now all of a sudden we have an entire week. What do we do with that? So I do think the technology in some ways will help us become more human because it will facilitate what I think is going to be a second renaissance.
And that makes total sense. Tony, can you tell us again the name of your book?
So it's HR Without People. That's if you just search on HR Without People, because then of course there's a little bit of a long piece after that about how a field is adapting to an industrial revolution. But if you search HR Without People, it'll be the first book that comes up in your search.
Excellent. Well, Tony, I appreciate everything you said today because I think you've brought a lot of really good, meaty subjects for these executives to really think about as they're looking at adopting technology and its impact on their own culture internally, their employees, and their customers. So I appreciate you, joining us today to talk through this.
Michael, I appreciate you having me. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Transform Now. For more insightful discussions on digital transformation and more, check out our podcast channel where you'll find all of our previous episodes. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player. And if you like what you heard, please leave us a review. For more information about digital transformation and the future of work, check out blueprism.com to learn how Blue Prism's digital workforce is enabling enterprise transformation now.